Hello, everyone. Thanks so much for joining me today for a presentation entitled Lead Generation ROI for MSPs. My name is Devin Rose, and I'm from eBridge Marketing Solutions. And today's presentation, this is actually the first time I'm giving this presentation. It actually was born out of some conversations that I've had with MSPs over the years. And frankly, one of the biggest questions as marketers we get most often, and one of the most challenging questions to answer, is related to ROI. ROI obviously is the measurement that most business people really care about the most. But the reality is that there are a ton of variables that go into ROI, especially when it comes to lead generation. And so providing an answer to a question like what type of ROI can I expect is quite difficult. And as a marketer, you end up feeling like you're maybe feeling a little bit evasive, like you're not able to answer the question directly head on. So what I did is I was thinking about how to solve it and how I could provide better answers to the questions about ROI. And we actually created an ROI calculator specifically for MSPs and specifically for lead generation campaigns. So today's presentation is going to go through various lead generation tactics. We're going to come up with some assumptions about those tactics, and then we're going to compute them in the ROI calculator that we've put together to help answer the question about what type of ROI you can expect for various tactics. Oops, sorry, just one sec. Okay, so before we get into the meat and the potatoes of the presentation today, a little bit about eBridge Marketing Solutions and myself, Devin Rose. I am eBridge's VP of Digital Marketing, and we are a boutique marketing agency that really serves IT service providers such as MSPs, obviously, web hosts, and other IT service firms like data centers and infrastructure service providers, and various vendors serving this ecosystem. We're located in beautiful Vancouver, British Columbia, and we were established here in 2001 by my boss, whose name is Heartland Ross. Many of you may know him already. And eBridge, we do offer a full range of marketing services. We really specialize on digital marketing for IT service companies. But if you have any questions about marketing in general for IT service companies, even if it's not related to this presentation or to lead generation, please feel free to ask those at the end, and I'll do my best to answer them. So I mentioned that we created an ROI calculator, and here on the left-hand side of this screen is a screenshot of the calculator. So the way it works is there are 6 fields that you need to input information for, and you simply click the Calculate ROI button. And the default parameters that are on, the pre-populated with the calculator, if you go onto the page right now, these are all parameters that we came up with, which are essentially loose approximations for what would be a normal amount for an MSP. End users, our default amount here is 25. Obviously it can vary wildly depending on the MSP, but that's kind of in the right normal range there. Monthly revenue per end user, 150 is pretty normal for MSPs. Again, it ranges for larger MSPs offering more services are going to be higher in that regard. Profit margin, this is one that came out of some research we did, and 7.3% was a number cited online as an average profit margin. And I believe it ranges up to like 18, 19% for the best of breed MSPs, but we decided to go with the 7.3% to be conservative. Monthly churn, this backs out to, it's 0.6% per month, so per year it's about 7%. And that's an average that when we talked to a few people in the industry was a consensus about correct for an average MSP's churn rate. Cost per lead and close rate, the 2 ones in the bottom. This is really going to be the parameters that we are changing mostly in today's presentation to discuss the various tactics. $1,000, you could use any number there, but $1,000 is the right neighborhood. Close rate, a typical close rate for B2B is about 25 to 33%. So that's for sales qualified leads. So, our default we went with there is 25%. But the point isn't obviously just to go in and calculate based on the default parameters. If you were to go onto our webpage and use this calculator, I would suggest you input whatever information that you have to customize it to your individual situation. And the calculator allows us to analyze a variety of different lead generation tactics, which we're going to do on the slides to come. So after you click the ROI button, this is what shows up, and on the right-hand side of the slide, these are the ROI results. So from top to bottom, average customer lifetime, we calculate it as 13.9 years. That's mostly based off of the churn rate. The customer lifetime value factors in, how the customer lifetime and also the MRR. Your cost per acquisition is factored in, or is calculated using cost per lead and close rate. And then the ROI that everyone cares about, in this case, it's just over 1,000% for our default parameters. And given that ROI, we can calculate the average yearly return and the break-even time. So let's talk about some initial impressions of these default parameters. First and foremost, personally, I was surprised by the length of customer lifetime and the associated value. At a churn rate of about 7%, it means your average customer lifetime is about 14 years. That is more than I actually realized. So that was one takeaway for me. And then, of course, if you have a customer for 14 years, so you're charging a monthly rate, the customer lifetime value, it was higher than I expected as well. I had not fully realized that it was, as high as $45,000 for a typical conversion. I was also surprised a little bit by the even with a high cost per lead, our default parameters achieved a compelling ROI of 1,000%. That was higher than I expected, given $1,000 cost per lead. And as a rule of thumb, in advertising, so not in lead generation, but in advertising, there's a metric called return on ad spend. And in that realm, about 500 to 600% is considered good. Obviously, more than that's better, but you're looking for about 500, 600% return on ad spend in advertising. So we can kind of use that as a rule of thumb here for lead generation as well. And an ROI of 1,000 obviously exceeds that 500 to 600 range. So certainly considered a good ROI here. At least that's my first bluff, my impression. And the other impression I had initially is just I'd never really thought about lead generation campaigns in terms of yearly return or break even previously. So, I don't really have, or at least I didn't really have a good frame of reference for what would be acceptable there. But I hope by going through the presentation today and comparing some different examples, we'll firm up a bit of a rule of thumb and a frame of reference that we can use to analyze those metrics. So we should distinguish between a couple different types of leads, and a lot of this will be familiar to you, so I won't spend a lot of time on this. But there are MQLs and SQLs. So marketing qualified leads, MQLs, they have shown at least some sort of interest in interacting with your brand through some sort of interaction with your marketing materials. They've stuck their hand up and said, "Yeah, I'm interested in some more information." Often they have volunteered their contact information, and then you'll take their contact information and feed it into your lead nurturing system or your CRM. And going from MQLs to SQLs, which are sales qualified leads, the conversion rate between that does vary wildly between tactics. So I just want to say that as a disclaimer. Today's presentation, I'm making some assumptions about this conversion rate for different tactics, and I did find some research to help me with that, but there isn't a lot of research available online. So, I would just say that, take this for what it is. It's an approximation. This is an estimation for this exercise, and it's please don't take it as the holy grail, because it is going to be variable, and frankly, there's just not a lot of research that's been done into this sort of area. But then, once they've converted to an SQL, what's that mean? That means that not only have they stuck their hand up and said, "I'm interested in your company," but they've also interacted with your sales team and matched your sales team's qualification criteria. So quite often, BANT qualification criteria is used, and there's various other ones as well. But however you define what your qualified leads are. And as I mentioned, a typical close rate for SQLs for MSPs or B2B in general is about 25 to 33%. So we'll be using that range for our assumptions. All right, now let's get into it. Let's get into the real tactics. So first we have content syndication. Content syndication is when you produce a lead generation asset such as a white paper, a case study, infographic, or a recorded webinar, and you use a third party to distribute it. So this was a little bit more in vogue, I would say, a few years ago. You would see a little bit more often back then. And the idea is that the person who's visiting the third party website who wants to download your asset has to disclose their contact information to do so. So the leads that are being generated here are MQLs, and you're generally speaking, you're going to pay about $60 to $100 per lead from this method, depending on how specific the criteria that you're using in terms of your qualification. So $60 would be probably standard for like mid-sized businesses, but if you're going after enterprise or something that's a little bit more niche, it's probably going to be closer to 100. In terms of our close rate, MQL to SQL, again, this is based off of loose research, so don't quote me on the exact numbers here, but it's going to be on the lower end of range, so about 2.5% for this sort of a tactic. The quality of traffic leads is not going to be very good compared to some other sources we'll be talking about. And then to convert the SQL into a paying customer, because the quality isn't going to be as high, we'll assume it's on the lower end of our normal range. And if we multiply the MQL to SQL conversion rate and then the SQL to customer conversion rates together, we get that at the very bottom there, the total is 0.6%. So yeah, just on the left-hand side in the calculator here, for the cost per lead, which I highlighted, it's $80, which is the midpoint. And then we have our close rate. And the rest of the parameters at the top are unchanged based off of the defaults. So let's see what happens to our ROI when our cost per lead is $80 and our close rate is 0.6%. We get an ROI of 250%. So, at first glance, that sounds pretty good. 250%, I think, that's a substantial ROI. But then we go back to our rule of thumb about the return on ad spend, about 500 to 600%. And then, it's about half the range we'd like to be in by that rule of thumb. And you can kind of see why, because, if you look at the break-even time of 4.6 years, I mentioned I wasn't really sure what a rule of thumb should be for break-even time, but I feel pretty sure that 4.6 years is too long. So, I think pretty conclusively we can say that content syndication just is not worth it for most MSPs. Okay, now outbound lead generation. And sorry, I think you might be a little bit cut off by my image up there, but it says overseas provider, and we'll do a domestic provider also. So outbound lead generation is the process of using email and LinkedIn and data mining to outreach to individuals at organizations that match your target criteria. So I'd say it's mostly done by email, and these sorts of programs, when you're kind of casting a wide net, you're sending a lot of emails. So you're generating a variety of different quality of leads as well. So you're generating both MQLs and SQLs. And generally speaking, it's very general, but you're probably going to pay in the neighborhood of about $300 to $450 per lead with this sort of a tactic. And for our close rate, I'm assuming that because this is an overseas provider, we might get a little bit more MQLs than we're getting SQLs. So I've assumed we're going to get about 2/3 MQLs and 1/3 SQLs. And made some assumptions in regard to the close rates there, which back out to 9.4%. So on the left-hand side of the calculator, again, we've adjusted the cost per lead to $375 and the close rate to our 9.4%. And let's see what the ROI is. 1,000%. So it's nice to hit the 4 digits again, and that sounds obviously very, very strong. And the other thing that sticks out to me here is the break-even time of being 1.3 years. It's interesting; it's still over a year, given the ROI is 1,000%, very good. But I think 1.3 years would probably be palatable for most MSPs, especially considering that you still have that 13.9-year customer lifetime. So, in a sense, you would have 12.6 years of profit after that one, the first period or the break-even period. So, 12.6 years where you're essentially free rolling. So, this seems really appealing for a lot of MSPs, and definitely worth it for most MSPs. And the nice thing about using an overseas provider for something like this too, which we actually, by the way, at eBridge, we're partnered with an overseas provider, is that the mechanics of administering these sort of outbound lead generation campaigns with email, the mechanics are time consuming and it's difficult to pull it off. So, it's helpful to have an overseas provider, maybe to save a little bit on the labor costs, because yeah, there's only so much you can do to really minimize the amount of time that it takes to do these campaigns. And obviously, if you use an overseas provider, it reduces the cost per lead. And to compare, we can talk about outbound lead generation. So same sort of tactic, using email and LinkedIn, mostly email and data mining. But we could talk about a domestic provider. And so with a domestic provider who understands the local market, a little bit better, has a little more sophistication, you're going to have more SQLs and MQLs when you compare to the overseas provider, and you're also going to have a better close rate. Of course, if you're using domestic labor and you're in North America, it's going to be more costly to do this because the labor is going to be more expensive. So, generally speaking, leads generated from this method, you're probably paying $1,000, $2,000 per lead. It's certainly not cheap. It will vary quite a bit, but that's a reasonable range. And if we assume that there's more SQLs, let's say it's 50-50 compared to what we had before. And these are going to close more, so we can back out what the close rate would be at 18.8%, given some assumptions there. And yeah, we can input those into our calculator on the left-hand side. $1,500 for cost per lead, 18.8% for close rate, and let's see. We calculate an ROI of 472%. Okay, so again, keeping in mind our range of 500 to 600% being reasonable for return on ad spend, and using that as a rule of thumb, I mean, this is coming in just below what the acceptable, range would be. So, it's kind of interesting that the payout, the break-even time is 2.7 years. That, obviously that's significantly in the future, but I would just go back to how afterwards you would have 11.2 years of free rolling. So, to me, I can see why this is kind of borderline. It's right below our range where we were thinking it would be acceptable. And sure enough, it seems like the results are just kind of borderline as well. So the conclusion is it's probably not worth it to use a domestic provider to do outbound lead generation for most MSPs, but large organizations have more employees and typically require more services. So if you are a larger MSP yourself, perhaps, or you're just going after larger clients, um, it's reasonable to assume that the number of end users that you're going to have is going to be higher. And the MRR per end user is going to be significantly higher too. So on the left-hand side of our slide here in the calculator, I've adjusted the number of end users from 25 to 100, and the monthly revenue per end user from 150 to 175, reflecting those larger organizations. And let's see what happens with the ROI. Well, that's a much different story. We have, 2,500% ROI with a payback period of, half a year, 26%, annual return. Um, and so, obviously this would be, a huge success, a huge win. So, your expected ROI in this situation with larger organizations would be phenomenal, and I don't imagine many MSPs would turn this down if they're able to support larger organizations. And you can see the impact on the customer lifetime value in particular. Before we had it was 45,000. Yep. And now it's 212,000. So, up 4 times as much, and definitely a substantial improvement for sure. So the conclusion there is, outbound lead generation from a domestic provider, it's worth it for MSPs who are looking to serve larger organizations. If you're looking to serve smaller organizations, it's going to be a bit of an uphill battle. Inbound marketing. So to contrast with the outbound that we just discussed, inbound marketing is about getting people to reach out to you when they want your services. You're not reaching out to them. They're coming into your website, they're coming into your marketing mix by their own volition, and then you are marketing to them subsequently. So inbound marketing, it was popularized by HubSpot, and HubSpot likes to brand everything their own terms, but it's really just a fancy term to kind of say permission marketing, using content, SEO to get people to your site to see the content that you've written, and then adding value through email marketing to encourage leads to convert when they're ready to. So it's not as pushy; it's more about them coming to you when they want to. Inbound marketing generally generates MQLs because these people haven't talked to your sales team yet. And the cost for leads for for inbound marketing, it's about 40% of the cost of outbound is what I found in some research. So definitely this is a rule of thumb. Don't take this as a hard set rule, but we're going to use that for an assumption for our calculations today. And the MQL to customer close rate was 14% according to HubSpot. Again, take that for what it's worth. HubSpot may have a bit of an incentive in inflating that, but for the purposes of today's presentation, we'll use that. And so on the left-hand side on the calculator, I have inputted our midpoint for the cost per lead and the close rate. And let's see what we calculate. An ROI of about 1,000%. It's funny how that's come up a few times in the presentation, but this one is just a shade under 1,000%. And we have some familiar numbers in terms of the average yearly return being 17% or 18% rather, and break-even time about 1.4 years. So similar to what we saw before, inbound marketing, definitely worth it for most MSPs. It does take a little while to get going. That's one thing to note. Whenever you're doing like permission-based marketing, it's not going to have as quick returns as say like, I don't know, advertising or paid tactics, but generally speaking, you're going to have you're going to set up the stage for success going forward. So even though you don't get the results right away, you kind of build the machine for ongoing success. Okay, now buying or renting a lead list. This is kind of an inexpensive way to get contact information. And you typically get their phone number and the email number. It's typically provided by a large third party. This was definitely more in vogue, like, if content syndication was in vogue 3 years ago, this sort of a tactic was in vogue like 10 years ago. We still get asked we get asked about it from people who have maybe done marketing like 10 years ago, but took a break and came back to it or something. But this is generally not really done too much anymore because it's just, for B2B marketing, you want to take a quality over quantity approach, and this is the opposite direction. So yeah, with this sort of a tactic, you're generating essentially junk leads for a couple bucks a pop. So, for the cost per lead, we have $2 there. And then for the close rate, based off some assumptions, I think about 1/100% would be would be a reasonable close rate for these sorts of leads. So just terrible. And let's see how it works out. 185% ROI. So I'm actually surprised it was positive. But look at that cost per acquisition, $16,000 cost per acquisition. That's that's insane. So a break-even time of 6 years. I don't think anyone is going to want to wait 6 years to see a return on their marketing. So I feel fairly conclusive that we can say buying or renting a lead list is a waste of time. Do not bother doing it. Yeah, you're just gonna spend money for no purpose. And then there's Google Ads, good old Google Ads, the big player in the marketplace. And when you're doing lead generation with Google Ads, they don't have like a lead generation native offering. But what you can do is set up the ads to drive traffic to your website, and then have a landing page which is featuring gated content. So this is similar to the content syndication, where it's a white paper, a case study, infographic, a webinar. And it's, the person has to disclose their information before they can download it. But the big difference is it's on your website as opposed to a third party's website. So for Google Ads, to get people to that landing page, you pay probably about $10 to $20 per click in this industry. Um, and a reasonable, conversion rate to get somebody to disclose their contact information and become an MQL is about 2.5%. Maybe a little bit higher than that, but for our purposes, 2.5% will work. And so that backs out to your cost per MQL being $400 to $800. And I'm going to take the midpoint for our calculation of $600 on the left-hand side. And then, the close rate, we can come up with some assumptions based on the fact that it's higher quality traffic. So our SQL close rate there is 33%, which is at the higher end. The MQL to SQL being 14 was based on some research from HubSpot. So our total is 4.66%, which is what I have in the calculator there. And let's see what that calculates. 254%. So similar to the buying or renting the list, not very good at all. So, based on that, I think we can say that it's not worth it for most MSPs. But wait, Google's cost per click is heavily influenced by the amount of competition in your area. So if you're in, a big city, that $10 to $20 amount per click would probably apply to you. But if you're in a tertiary or secondary market, it would be significantly less. And as a ballpark, I was suggesting $2.50 to $5, which would be which is 1/4 what would be in a large market. And that does make a big difference on our calculations here, because the MQL goes down to about $100 to $200. So for our calculation, I've taken the midpoint of 150, kept everything else the same, and let's see what happens. Now our ROI is 1,300% with a payback time of just a year. So quite a drastic difference. And it just goes to show you that why this question is hard to answer. So if someone were to ask me, what's the ROI for lead generation for Google Ads? My first question is going to be, well, what sort of market are you in, or how much competition is there in the city? And that might lead to an hour-long conversation before we get to circle back on the ROI. So it definitely depends on your individual circumstance, and it's hard to provide blanket information about Google Ads, but it's definitely worth exploring and seeing what sort of cost per clicks are in your region. So Google Ads is a worthwhile strategy for MSPs in tertiary or secondary markets. But wait, for MSPs and cities targeting large organizations, Google Ads can still make sense as long as there's sufficient MRR. However, it's always a good idea to have a Google Ads campaign bidding on your own branded keywords. This is a little bit counterintuitive, because if someone's searching for your branded keywords, so in our instance, let's say someone searches for eBridge marketing solutions, our website's going to tend to pop up like already, because it's such a strong key phrase for us. So you might think like, well, if I'm popping up at the top of Google search results already organically, why would I want to pay for an ad at the top of Google also for those branded keywords? And the answer is that there's lots of evidence to suggest that it improves conversion rates. And there's a psychological reason to this, I think. It makes you come across more professionally, not just a mom and pop shop who doesn't have it together to organize themselves to get their Google Ads going. Like, it shows you a degree of sophistication. And also it protects you against your competitors bidding on your keywords. So, if someone searches for you, the last thing you want is to show up below your competitors. So it makes sense for most MSPs to bid on their own branded keywords. And finally, the last tactic we have today, before we get into questions, is the paid social media. So for B2B, the networks that are most important are LinkedIn and Facebook, and they both offer native lead generation ads. So the way that these work is that they show up in the user's feed, and it's similar to like the content syndication, where there's some sort of a lead generation asset being offered, and the person has to disclose their information to download it. But the difference is it shows up right in their feed. It works very similarly for both LinkedIn and Facebook. And the nice thing is, like, sometimes if you're doing content syndication or even driving people to a landing page on your own site, they're not going to want to disclose their actual information. So, you tend to get like some degree of people will, say their name is Mickey Mouse or Barack Obama, or they'll say their zip code is 90210, that sort of thing. So it's nice with LinkedIn and Facebook, and especially LinkedIn, because they draw the contact information from the user's profile. So people don't tend to lie on their LinkedIn. They tend to provide straightforward and truthful information about things like their job titles, and also their, the name of the company and the size of the company. All that tends to be more accurate on LinkedIn than you would get in some other tactics, and to a lesser degree, Facebook as well. So for both LinkedIn and Facebook, you're going to be generating MQLs, and both of them actually have tools where you can go on and estimate this as well. But the average cost per lead is going to be about $30 to $50. And it will vary, just like the cost per click, the Google ads. It will vary depending on your region, how competitive it is, but that's a reasonable approximation. And the company sizes here are going to skew a little bit smaller. So, before we were assuming that the number of end users might be 25. Here I've adjusted it down to 10, so I didn't highlight that cell, but at the very top, you can see that it's been adjusted down to 10. And I think that's just because, big companies aren't making decisions on social media as much as small companies are. At least that's my experience. I'm sure it does vary a little bit. And so we have our cost per lead of $40, which is the midpoint of the 30 to 50. And our close rate, based on the assumptions that I put together there, about 5%. And let's see what the ROI is. 2,180%. So significantly better than anything else we've had, with a break-even time of essentially 2/3 of a year or half a year, and an average yearly return of 25%. So obviously this is outstanding return. I think every MSP would love to have this sort of a return, and so very confidently I can say that it's worth it for most MSPs to try paid social media and to see if they can get a similar ROI. But just to recognize that the volume is likely going to be low. And if you go onto Facebook or LinkedIn and you do start to create a campaign, and LinkedIn and Facebook will tell you approximately how many leads you can generate per month, and you can probably expect a few. So, this is a really nice tactic. It's worth doing, but it's not very scalable, I suppose, unless you're like an MSP that might be more nationally oriented. But for most MSPs that are looking to work in their own city or county, the volume is going to be low, but it's still worthwhile. So that brings us to the conclusion, and really the what I wanted to leave you with. And if you are wondering about what sort of ROI that you can expect from lead generation campaigns, is to understand that it does vary wildly. There are a ton of variables involved, and going onto our website and checking out the calculator yourself and inputting your own variables and playing around with it would be a good way to see kind of what might be an appropriate tactic for your company. But generally speaking, the best bets for most MSPs are paid social media, inbound marketing, and outbound lead generation from an overseas provider. And then, for some MSPs, it's going to make sense to have Google Ads campaigns and outbound lead generation from a domestic provider, depending on the size of targets you're going after and how much competition is in your local market. So proceed with caution on those, because they're not going to be fits for everybody. And you can pretty much 100% avoid buying or renting lists or doing any sort of content syndication, because those are just not going to work anymore. And I've certainly had personal experiences which align with the calculator in that regard. So save your money, don't do those things. And that is really it for the presentation today. So, thank you very much for joining. I really appreciate everybody's attention. And, if you are interested in discussing lead generation for your specific MSP, eBridge Marketing offers all these tactics that we're talking about today. We can help you with, and might even be able to help you determine what some reasonable parameters would be for the calculator, what sort of ROI you could expect going forward. So if you're interested in having a discussion like that for your company, please don't hesitate to reach out. My contact information is right there, or you can also go through our website. And the link to the MSP ROI calculator is there as well. It is ebridgemarketingsolutions.com/MSP-ROI-calculator. And if you have any questions, I would be happy to field them now. I'm just going to pull up the questions. Not seeing any questions at the moment, but I'll just give everybody a second. And maybe I can talk a little bit about how eBridge would work with you in lead generation. Because obviously, as a marketing agency, we are not the actual salespeople. So we are not the people who are closing these deals. And so that is an important factor to consider too before you start up a lead generation campaign. Is there isn't really much point in generating leads if you are not going to be closing them. And so that's one of the questions that we ask people when they are contacting us for lead generation help is, tell us about your sales process. Because frankly, we don't want to start a lead generation campaign for you guys if it's not going to work, and it's not going to work if the sales process isn't working. So maybe if you're not closing your SQLs already in that 25 to 33% range, that might give you pause and make you wonder if lead generation is really a good activity to be investing in. Obviously, you're going to get leads from referrals and from word of mouth already, but in terms of like investing money into actively going out and getting other leads, you want to make sure that you have your sales process, working nicely and effectively before you start investing into those sorts of things. So that's a nice prerequisite to have. And yeah, as I say, we're looking to partner with companies who want to grow their businesses, and we're not just looking to sell lead generation campaigns or anything. So it's important to have both avenues, both the good quality leads and the good sales cycle. Okay, well, if there are no further questions, then I will shut it down here. And I thank everybody again for joining today. And if you have any other questions afterwards or anything comes to mind, please don't hesitate to reach out. Thank you very much.